Okay, so again, beginning of Exodus talks about what happened with Joseph, and then a new Pharaoh arises, forgets about Joseph and all that the Jews had done to preserve Egypt and all other nations. And they really just start driving the Egyptians into really hard bondage, and they cry out to God. God gives them Moses. Moses is about 40 years old. He decides to essentially kill one of the Egyptians who's brutally beating one of the Israeli slaves, one of the Jews. And in such, the Pharaoh hears about it and he flees to Midian. He's in Midian for 40 years. He gets a wife, and from his wife, he has 2 children. And God calls him back at the burning bush. So Moses sees the burning bush, and God tells him that this is holy ground. He gives him instruction to let him know that he's going to be reviving the people and rescuing them out of this hard bondage from the Pharaoh. And in this time, Moses responds to God and says, who shall I say is sending me to them? Because the people are going to ask, who is it that has sent you? And God responds with the I am who I am statement, or I exist, I am existence, right? And we've talked about how that's very familiar, because that's the same thing that Jesus said when he was on trial. Most assuredly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. So that's where we get the Jesus laying claim to being God. Then Moses was also given these 3 signs of what he would do to show the people to signify that he had spoken with the pre-existent one, God. And his staff turned into a snake, his hand turned white as snow underneath his garment, and he poured water, it turned into blood. Pharaoh, the people received these signs, and unfortunately, it didn't pan out so well in the beginning, because the people were put into even harder bondage, and they were asked, Moses, why have you done this for us? We told you, so on and so forth. Pharaoh's not going to listen. And so we see the response from God through Moses to Pharaoh. And we talked about 9 of 10 plagues out of session 2, but there was a total of 10. And the question that we asked last week was, can you name the plagues? So Tatia and Uncle Charlie, you guys were gone. Can you name one of the 10 plagues?
Yeah, grasshoppers.
Yes. Mike? Yes. Shelly? Yes. Michelle? Yes. Miguel?
The darkness.
Darkness was said. Give me another one.
The boils.
Boils was said.
Frogs. Hailstone.
Yes. Okay. What about you, Miss Vicky? Last one.
She's inside. I will say the blood.
Yeah. Okay. So we seen water to blood. We saw the frogs, lice, flies, death of the livestock, boils, locust, hail, and darkness. This is a perfect slide for that. And the last warning, which I can't believe nobody shouted out, was the last plague was that the firstborn of all the Egyptians would die, the firstborn of every animal, the firstborn of every man, from the greatest of Pharaoh to the person who was a bondservant inside the prison, the lowest form of person. That's because on session 2, we only went through 9 plagues. What is your 10th plague?
The serpents, the river, the water to boil, the frogs.
There was no serpent. There was no serpent plague. That was a sign. He threw his staff down, but then Pharaoh's people also threw their staffs down, and there was the multiple serpents, but Moses' serpent ate theirs and then turned back into a staff. So the last plague is, we see the warning of the last plague, which is where we left off, and that brought us into session 3, and we talked greatly about the Passover. We spent mostly one session just talking about it specifically, and we see that this is the origination of these certain dates and how these dates tie in specifically to the time when Christ presented himself as the Messiah, the King. And one of the things that I had noticed before that one of the pastors that I was listening to throughout this week had mentioned is that God's calendar does not consist of months with names. He refers to them as numbers. on the first month, on the second month, on the 10th month. It's not the Gregorian calendar, but the advent of some of the Babylonian captivity and all these other places that they were in captivity to, that the Israelite nation took the same pagan names and added them to their calendar, but they have a religious calendar. And that's where we see like these, like for instance, we have our calendar now is mostly names that are from Greek gods. We have these different Monday and Tuesday and all these different things that go along with that. And the very various months that we have is off of these signs that we have from these Greek gods and things like that. So I thought it was cool because I hadn't noticed that before, but here we see it on the 10th month and talks about the lamb being without blemish on the 14th day of that same month. We know that they call that month Abib, and that Abib has the same meaning as the word Nisan. So we see in the New Testament, the Hebrews record the month of Nisan, but it would have been also known as just the 10th month. And so the Passover takes place. The instruction that was given was that there needed to be a blood sacrifice. A baby lamb was to be presented on the 10th day, kept with the family, made sure it was without any blemish, slaughtered on the 14th day, and then a hyssop, and their blood would be dipped on a hyssop and brushed across the door to signify that their blood was being covered. And this essentially not only talks about blood sacrifice needing to be is what's required to cover the sins of the nation. We see that Jesus's blood was shed for us, and that's where we see in Romans 6:20, we tied this in there for what we know what the penalty of sin is and who's the true judge who can judge us for our sins, right? And here we have in Romans 6:20, for when we were slaves to sin, you were free in regard to righteousness. What fruit did you have then in the things which you are now ashamed? For the end of those things is death. But now, having been set free from sin and having become slaves of God, you will have your fruit to holiness, and the end, everlasting life. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus, our Lord. And we are going to talk about that concept in this upcoming text. It was very exciting to read this. It was something I hadn't compiled. So Jesus is actually our Passover. If we flash forward to the New Testament, and one verse that really sums that up is what John the Baptist says, behold, the Lamb of God. Okay, we knew what the lamb signified. We just read about it in the Passover. And what is the Lamb of God doing? Takes away the sin of the world. And he's referring to Jesus. It basically checks all the boxes for that. So now we're at page 61, chapter 13. We're going to talk about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and beast, it is mine. And Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you went out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, for by strength of hand the Lord brought you out to this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten. On this day you are going out in the month of Abib. And it shall be, when the Lord brings you in the land of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall keep this service in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and no leavened bread shall be seen among you, nor shall leaven be seen among you in all your quarters. And you shall tell your son in that day, saying, this is done because of what the Lord did for me when I came up from Egypt. It shall be a sign to you on your hand, and as a memorial between your eyes, that the Lord's law may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this ordinance in its season from year to year. Okay. So let's talk about, this is something that I had pulled from Bible Answers. I like this one a lot. Just a real quick slide on why ancient Israel observes the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Well, we understand why from reading this chapter right here, right? On this day, tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt, okay? But here's pretty cool about what in the New Testament, flash forward some 3,000 years, actually, that's not accurate. I want to say it's maybe 2,000 years. We'll talk about that. I have a timeline too. So Paul mentions this in 1 Corinthians. Therefore, let us keep the feast not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Paul did not treat these festivals as outdated Jewish traditions. He considered them essential observances for God's called and chosen people in all ages and cultures. He understood their relationship to Christ's role in God's master plan. Paul commanded the Corinthian Christians, mostly Gentiles, to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread. His instructions show that Christians from non-Jewish communities and cultures kept the days of unleavened bread. Setting an example for all Christians today, these Jews and non-Jews observe these days in accordance with God's laws. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, the second of God's annual festivals, represents the second step in God's plan for our redemption. Its main focus is on Christ as our deliverer, our savior. Therefore, it is a thoroughly Christian festival. That is why Paul compares a Christian's deliverance from sin through the sacrifice and assistance of Christ to Israel's deliverance from the Egyptian army at the Red Sea, which occurred probably on the final day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. He writes, "Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud. All passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ." After we are justified by Christ's sacrifice at the time of baptism, we must be led out of sin and into a righteous pattern of life, just as Israel was led out of its bondage during the same days of unleavened bread. This festival represents the work of the living, resurrected Christ, directly leading and assisting us in overcoming sin. Paul explained, much more then, having now been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from the wrath through him. For if we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his son. Much more, having been reconciled, we shall be saved by his life. And I'm going to skip to the next part here, but this is going to be significant. And we'll touch on this a little bit as we go through what happens at the Red Sea. So moving on, verse 17. Then it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest peradventure the people repent when they see war, and they return to Egypt. But God led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. And the children of Israel went up, harnessed out of the land of Egypt, and Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. For he had straitly sworn the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones away hence with you. And they took their journey from Succoth and encamped in Etham, in the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. So let's talk a little bit about this. What happened?
You skipped the law of the firstborn. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, let's read that real quick. I must have copied over that slide.
I kept trying to figure out where he was at.
No, I went through 16. Okay.
The law of the firstborn. you
Okay, let's read
stopped
the
at
law of the
11.
firstborn. I don't have that there. And what's weird is if you look at my bottom slide right here, I wrote 13, 1 through 16, so I must have skipped it on accident.
And it shall be when the Lord brings.
Oh, it is on here. I must have just not read it. Okay. So, and it shall be when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites that he swore to prepare for you and gives to you, that you shall set apart to the Lord all that open the womb. That is, every firstborn that comes from an animal which you have, the males shall be the Lord's, but every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb. And if you will not redeem it, then you shall break its neck. And all the firstborn of man among you, all among your sons, you shall redeem, so it shall be. When your son asks you in time to come, saying, what is this? You shall say to him, by strength of hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go, that the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore, I sacrifice to the Lord all males that open the womb, but the firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall be as a sign on your hand and your frontlets between your eyes, for by strength of hand the Lord brought you out of Egypt. I thought I read that. Okay, so let's talk real quick about that specifically. How you would redeem someone was that you would pay a price or put forth a sacrifice, right? That's why Christ is considered the Gentiles' Goel, the kinsman redeemer. He's paying for us and buying us into his family, and he did that with his blood. We've been paid for with a price. What's unique to these individuals is that all the other religions were having people sacrifice their kids to the idols. They would cut their kids in half and put them up on to the idol, their firstborn, and they would give them to Molech and give them to all these weird gods and things that we would think it would sounds very odd to us now, but this is actually, there's some weird, I don't want to get into that here. We'll keep politics out of that. So that's through 16. That's what God is saying, that you need to be redeemed. The donkey, in instance here, is a tool for the field. It's an unclean animal. If you want to keep the donkey, it must be redeemed with the blood of the lamb. So you would sacrifice a lamb to keep the donkey. If you weren't going to redeem it, its neck needed to be broken. The way it was. So verses 17 through 22. Then it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land of Egypt. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had placed the children of Israel under a solemn oath, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here with you. So they took their journey from Succoth and camped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud to lead them in the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or by pillar of fire by night before the people. So, some real quick questions. I know the image that I have here is by fire, but my first question that I have for you guys is, what is the benefit of having a pillar of a cloud during the day? I say that the number one obvious fact is that it's their guide. It's telling them where to go. What else would be the benefit on having a cloud cover during the day? In the middle of the day. Exactly. It's gonna provide protection from the heat of the day, right? Yeah. What about the fire at night?
The light of the world.
That's right. So we get warmth from the fire. We get a clear direction. I added security in there. If you were some other tribe and you wanted to attack these millions of people, because we know that there was between 1.6 and 2.5 million people in a tent, and there's a flame big enough to illuminate their entire camp just floating above them, you might think twice about attacking them. I know I would. It would be, I would be down there asking them, hey, what is this all about? Okay, so chapter 14. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp before Pihahiroth and between Migdol and the sea, opposite of Baal Zephon. You shall camp before it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land. The wilderness has closed them in. Then I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them. And I will gain honor over Pharaoh and all of his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. Now it was told the king of Egypt that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, why have we done this? that we have let Israel go from serving us. So he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. Also, he took 600 choice chariots and all the chariots of Egypt with captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and pursued the children of Israel. And all the children of Israel went out with boldness. So the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them camping by the sea at Pi-hahiroth before Baal-zephon. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptian marched after them. So they were afraid. They were very afraid. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than we should die in the wilderness. And Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. And the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward, but lift up your rod and stretch it out over the hand, stretch your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And I indeed will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. So I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gained honor for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. And the angel of God who went before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them, and the pillar of the cloud from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. Thus, it was a cloud and darkness to one, and it gave light to the other, and gave light by night to the other, so that the one did not come near to the other at all that night. You guys understand what's going on there? Pharaoh's men are being tactically blinded by this power that God's providing to bring shade during the day and light at nighttime. It has the opposite effect on them. So they can't make it through to the camp. And all why this is happening, Moses has parted the sea through God's instruction, and they're walking directly through, I believe they call it the Gulf of Suez, okay, which is the Red Sea. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. Now it came to pass in the morning watch that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and he troubled the army of the Egyptians, and he took off their chariot wheels, so they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come upon the Egyptians on their chariots and on their horsemen. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full depth, while the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. Then the waters returned to the covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh, and came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained, but the children of Israel had walked on dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. So the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servants Moses. So, kind of a cool imagery here. We see this great wind that's coming through, and at first glance, I did quite a bit of research on this because this was very intriguing to me. And I've read it before, I understand the story, but I wanted to go a little bit in depth into it. There are some that have said that you have a strong east wind that comes through, it creates this huge tidal pull, and it would pull all the water off the land, and they could walk across with this great wind, but that would not explain seeing water on both sides of them, right? This is people trying to rationalize a natural event that occurs with taking God out of it, so to speak. So I think this picture does a pretty good job of trying to explain like what they were walking through. Now, there is a anesthetist by the name of Ron Wyatt, and his goal was never for fame, but he wanted to be able to find certain things out of the Bible to utilize as a platform to preach to people, to show the accuracy of the Bible. And so during this time, he was in the, I believe he was in the early 50s to late 90s is when he was making all of these discoveries. He would go over to Saudi Arabia and these other places where they weren't welcome. And they would not solidify a visa passport for him to try and look for these biblical type discoveries. And this is also the guy who found Noah's Ark.
Yeah. Looking for those chariots.
So he went to look for the chariots, and he found what he thought was chariot wheels. And so he gathers all this evidence on what he thinks is right. And as he's being taxied across to the other side, the government finds out that they believe they're Israeli spies. They don't believe they're from the United States. And so they arrest him and put him in jail. And he's in jail for a week. And while he's there, he notices that all their people are dying and they're going through yellow fever. And so him being a physician, he's a board certified physician and anesthetist, he starts telling them to start taking prescriptions of olive oil, which I don't even know that this is the treatment. And I was reading this from his wife's testimony about what had happened. And in doing such, they started becoming healed from all the yellow fever. They were pouring it inside their toilets to stop the mosquitoes from thriving and things like that. So they said, how certain are you about this area? I mean, what is it that you believe? And so while he was out there, he found this pillar. There's a pillar that was erected on one side, and it has all this ancient Masoretic text, original Hebrew on one side, and on the exact other side, there's also another writing that's also in Hebrew. And he knew Hebrew, and he understood this as Solomon marking this area on this is the place where Moses crossed through this area. Solomon, right? The wisest man that ever lived, so on and so forth. And he shared with them, and I guess there was a lot of unrest about this because it was going on. So during that time, he was able to snap some pictures with these cameras that he had available in the 70s through this area that he believed where they had crossed. And he had explained, and I watched all these videos on this, and it was fascinating because coral won't grow just on the sand. It has to attach itself to something. And coral doesn't grow in these weird angles and things like that. It has to be something that's there before. And then over, the 1,000 years that it's there, the coral will absorb whatever metal or wood is there. And what will be left is the exact shape of what's there in coral. And so he goes down and takes these images of what he has. And you see this image on the right. He believes that to be a hub. The center one, he believes this to be an axle where it's a wheel on top, the center axle, and then the wheel below it. And they've actually found, after going through one of Pharaoh's tombs, they found, how it had been preserved in one of these, when they do these discoveries, they found a complete chariot, and they have it on display over there, and it displays this type of axle setup. And this was what he believed to be one of the chariot wheels over here from that time frame. So really, really cool. I have this link here where he shows all these things, these pillars. He has pictures of these pillars. The Saudi Arabian government put a red marker flag like we have for PG&E, and they took everything out so nobody would be tempted to cross the border. They literally started taking all of these things out so nobody would be tempted to merge into their land or do illegal practices like what this guy was doing. And so you can't see it anymore. You only have the pictures of what he has, but there is a flag, and they don't say what the flag is there or what the marking point is there for. which is terrible. It sucks. However, it's cool for me to see stuff like this because it's like, hey, this is the area. It's interesting. So just like what we would do, you have, we'll call it 1.5 million people who've just witnessed this amazing miracle, plus the 10 plagues. They know that God has this power. They see this redemptive property of God for them. And I mean, this is something that's going to be passed down for generation to generation, because every single family that was there bore witness to it. Your grandpa is going to tell, you know what I mean? Everyone's going to tell everyone about what's happened here. Moses was the one who was appointed to write it down. And this is for us, you know? And so what happens after this? This is the people. Then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song to the Lord and spoke. They're singing. They are overwhelmed with joy, just like we would be, knowing that you are free from this bondage in slavery and this bondage and service to the Egyptians. And this is our freedom that we have from sin. This is the gift that we're given from Christ. The signification of the Red Sea being parted is like us going through our baptism. When we're baptized and we come out of the water, we're free from the bondage of sin. We're no longer bound to it. And we can start working our life into that pattern of what God would have for us. So here's their song. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and its rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will praise him. My father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has cast into the sea. His chosen captains also are drowned in the Red Sea. The depths have covered them. They sank to the bottom like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, has become glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, has dashed the enemy in pieces. And in the greatness of your excellence, you have overthrown those who rose against you. You sent forth your wrath. It consumed them like stubble. And with the blast of your nostrils, the waters were gathered together. The flood stood upright like a heap. The depths congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire shall be satisfied on them. I will draw my sword. My hand shall destroy them. You blew with your wind. The sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? You stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your mercy, you in your mercy have led forth the people whom you have redeemed. You have guided them in your strength, your holy habitation. The people will hear and will be afraid. Sorrow will take hold of those inhabitants of Philistia. Then the chiefs of Edom will be dismayed. The mighty men of Moab, trembling, will take hold of them. All the inhabitants of Canaan will melt away. Fear and dread will fall on them. By the greatness of your arm, they will be as still as a stone, till your people pass over, O Lord, till the people pass over. Whom you have purchased, you will bring them in and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, in the place, O Lord, which you have made for your own dwelling, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established. The Lord shall reign forever and ever. For the horses of Pharaoh went with his chariots and the horsemen into the sea, and the Lord brought back the waters of the sea upon them. But the children of Israel went on dry land in the midst of the sea. Then Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took the timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dances. And Miriam answered them, saying, Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and its rider he has thrown into the sea. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea. Then they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. Now, when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore, the name of it was called Marah. And the people complained against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. When he cast it into the waters were made sweet. There he made a statute and an ordinance for them. And there he tested them and said, if you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians. For I am the Lord who heals you. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees. So they camped there by the waters. So one thing that I noticed that I don't know if anyone else did is Moses was a descendant of Levi, and Levi was, do you remember whose son Levi was? Levi was one of Jacob's sons. And Jacob had how many sons? 12. And that's where we get the 12 tribes of Israel, because God changed Jacob's name to Israel and told him that they would no longer be Jacob, but he would be a nation. And so from his 12 sons, we have the 12 tribes. I think it's interesting to note here that this land that they go to has 12 wells. I almost wonder if it has something to do with a well for each one of the tribes. So, chapter on, 16. Boy, that's really fine print. And they journeyed from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. And on the 15th day of the second month, they were departed from the land of Egypt. Then the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said to them, oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt. When we sat by the pots of meat and we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. And it shall be on the 6th day that they shall prepare what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. Then Moses and Aaron said to all the children of Israel, at evening you shall know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your complaints against the Lord. But what are we that you complain against us? Also Moses said, this shall be seen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and in the morning bread to the full. For the Lord hears your complaints, which you make against him. And what are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses spoke to Aaron, say to all the congregation of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your complaints. Now it came to pass, as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the children of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I have heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. So it was that quail came up at the evening and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay all around the camp. And when the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a small round substance, as fine as frost on the ground. So when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, this is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is the thing which the Lord commanded, which the Lord has commanded. Let every man gather it according to each one's need. 1 omer for each person according to the number of persons. Let every man take for those who are in his tent. Then the children of Israel did so and gathered some more, some less. So when they measured it by omers, he who gathered much had nothing left, and he who gathered little had no lack. For every man had gathered according to each one's need, and Moses said, let no one leave any of it till morning. Notwithstanding, they did not heed Moses, but some of them left a part of it till morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them. So they gathered it every morning, every man according to his need. And when the sun became hot, it melted. And so it was on the 6th day that they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. And all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today, and boil what you will boil, and lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept until morning." So they laid it up till morning, as Moses commanded. And it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it. Then Moses said, "Eat that today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none." Now it happened that some people went out on the 7th day to gather, but they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, for the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, he gives you on the 6th day bread for 2 days. Let every man remain in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day." So the people rested on the 7th day. And the house of Israel called its name manna. And it was like white coriander seed, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Then Moses said, "This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Fill an omer with it to be kept for your generations, that they may see the bread which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt." And Moses said to Aaron, "Take a pot and put an omer of manna in it and lay it up before the Lord to keep it for your generations, as the Lord commanded Moses." So Aaron laid up before the testimony to be kept. And the children of Israel ate manna 40 years until they came into the inhabited land. They ate manna until they came into the border of the land of Canaan. Now an omer is 1/10 of an ephah. Okay. Yeah, and I knew what that was because I remember what an ephod is, but I didn't relook at it, and I don't remember what it is. So now they have food, right? They're traveling. They've got quail that they're eating. They've got manna that's coming to them. It's one of the pastors I heard said this is like Krispy Kreme donuts laying on the ground. It's the sweet wafer, like with honeys. It has all the calories that they need. So what do you think the next thing is that they're going to complain about? Then all the congregation of the children of Israel set out on their journey from the wilderness of Sin, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped in the Rephidim. But there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people contended with Moses and said, "Give us water that we may drink." So Moses said to them, "Why do you contend with me? Why do you tempt the Lord?" And the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, "Why is it that you have brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." And the Lord said to Moses, "Go on before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel. Also take in your hand your rod which you struck the river, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, and that the people may drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. So he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because the contention of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not?" Now we're going to see Israel's first battle. Now Amalek came and fought with the Israelites in Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, this is our first instance of Joshua, "Choose us some men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand." So Joshua did as Moses said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the to the top of the hill. And so it was, when Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands became heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands. the one on one side and the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this for a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called its name, the Lord is my banner. For he said, because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. And if you guys recall, that was something that Saul was asked to do as his first thing, was to destroy the Amalekites. And he didn't. Okay. Last chapter, chapter 18. So we see Jethro now. Do you guys remember who Jethro was?
Moses' father-in-law?
Yes. So Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, that the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back with her 2 sons, of whom the name of one was Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. And the name of the other was Eleazar, for he said, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. Now he had said to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming with you and with your wife and her 2 sons with her. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other about their well-being, and they went into the tent. And Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. Then Jethro rejoiced for all the good which the Lord had done for Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Jethro said, blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hands of Pharaoh, and who has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, for in the very thing in which they behaved proudly, he was above them. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and other sacrifices to offer to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. So I was as I was reading this, I was trying to consider Moses' family and his history, and how Jethro here is the priest of Midian. It would be a good question to ask on whether or not he was considered a godly priest, or if he was a priest of some other religion, because we know all these other things were going on. And I started to think about Moses's age. He was 80 years old when they were exiting Egypt. We know that time's going on because this happened in the 10th month, and we see that they're in the 7th month, so we see that time is passing. And so I was thinking about this, about the generations and the historicity of it. And this is kind of what I got out of this, is we see Moses right here on this bottom of the list, right? And we know that he lived 120 years. We'll get to his death pretty soon here. But as we look on this timeline of the time that they actually lived, his dad would have been able to commune with his grandpa, who is Jacob. So Moses' great-grandpa being Jacob, remember the promises that were given to Jacob and Israel and all those other things. And as I was looking at this, I was like, man, this is kind of crazy, because if you look at Jacob's dad, which was Isaac, he could have talked to the 3 sons of Noah after they had come off the ark, because of how long they had lived during that time period. Remember when we read Genesis, how people lived 900 and some odd years? When I looked at this breaking down, we know, as again, this is, if you call that year 0 over there, right? So most of the calendars that you see like this, or the genealogies, the timelines, it'll go from 0 to 4000 BC. And you'll see the way that they line these things up. But it was interesting for me to see is when we talk about how well they preserved the documentation of the flood, you know, Moses wrote down the first 5 books of Moses. He accounts everything that's happened from in the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth. Okay. It would have been keen in his memory when his grandpa was able to talk to some of the people that were on the on the boat during the flood. I was like, man, that's kind of cool. And then to consider that this time span between them is only 500 years. 500 years isn't a long time. It's not a long time when it's not considered a generation. So one of the things that I was thinking about is, what's something that happened 500 years ago, maybe not to date, but to this year, that is something that we're still talking about? And when I type that into Google, what's an event that happened 500 years ago? And that's when the Reformation of the church started.
There you go, get up.
500 years ago. And we're taking our kids to a school where it's a Lutheran school based on the teachings of Martin Luther, where they were protesting against what had become of the Catholic Church. There were some serious issues that were going on at that time. So they have the Protestant Reformation, and that's where we have basically the lay people get to read the Bible too. They translated it into the common person's language so they could also seek salvation through Christ. And there was a numerous other things, but that was 500 years ago this year when that started. So you think about how we have a recollection of it, and we could say, okay, these are the people, this is the time frame. The Jews were very strict about remembering their genealogy and their timeline. The Bedouins still, I was listening to a pastor talk about this, the Bedouins still are able to recite back like 10 or 12 generations. They know their timeline on who they came from, whose father's father, so on and so forth. So when you think of these events as they're happening, and knowing also that Moses was learned in everything. Remember, he went to the best of the Egyptian schools because he was like Pharaoh's son, right? I just thought it was cool to look at this timeline and think that his grandpa was talking to people that were on the boat, the flood.
So also every 500 years, something great happens, something historical.
I missed what you said.
Oh, go back, like every 500 years, something great, like say 500 to Noah is 500 years, from Adam to Noah, 500. From Noah to Shem over here is another 500. And from Shem to Moses, that's another 500.
I could see that. Yeah, I wouldn't call that exact, but yes, I could see that.
More or less. And like you said, 500 years ago, it was a Reformation.
Right. Well, and I mean, for me, it also to look at this is that you look at Noah basically could have talked to Enosh, right? And that was in the direct line of Adam and his wife. So knowing the historicity of this, they would have had a long time to share this information with each generation that subsided after them. Do you see what I'm saying? It's one thing for me to tell you about my dad versus you guys going and talking to my dad himself, right? Well, this is what my dad told me happened. Oh, you don't believe him? He's right over there. Just go ask him what happened. They had the opportunity to talk to each other about that kind of stuff.
To verify.
I thought that was kind of cool. And this kind of shows you the breakdown of where Moses came from, because I was looking at the fact that Moses's wife and their history, where they came from. So we see that Aram and Jochebed had Aaron, Moses, and Miriam. And then we see Moses marry Zipporah and has Gershom and Eleazar, which we just read. But Moses is of the tribe of Levi and is obviously a direct descendant from Abraham through that route, which I thought was cool. And then the latter part of this verse, this chapter, we'll finish this chapter next week. We'll go ahead and shut it down right there. But in essence, we see that Moses' father-in-law gives him some good advice, and we can talk about that then. And our homework is going to be to read chapters 19 through 23. We will probably get through 19 through 20 because that is where we receive the 10 Commandments. And actually, that's perfect. We can stop there. So I'm gonna stop the recording and then we can talk about any prayer requests that we got.